PlayStation, Nintendo, Sega, Dreamcast, Wii, arcade games, board games, tag, hide and seek. As kids, we play so many games. They're a part of our everyday lives. They allow us to retain knowledge in such a fun and satisfying way. And then when we become adults and we sort of don't use them as much in our everyday lives, which is sad because games really are so effective as a means of learning. And so I'm going to actually talk about gamification. And this is really the cheat code to next level training. So I'm going to talk about gamification in a training context, and I'll tell you more about what gamification is. I'm going to start with this example that's personal to me. This is a game that I actually played back in the 90s. As a kid, it took fourth grade learning concepts and it put them into a gamified environment where there was a haunted island theme and there was progress and rewards and feedback, and it just was a blast, and I was honestly addicted to it. I didn't even like learning until I actually played this game, and I picked up on math and geography and all kinds of fourth grade concepts, right? So it was a way for me to really grasp these concepts and do it in a way that I just really immensely enjoyed. So my name is Lindsay Smith. I'm actually going to discuss this cool thing called gamification. So hopefully you enjoy this presentation. I'm going to try and make it as fun as possible. Okay, so starting out, this is where we're going to take things. This is the direction I'm going to go in. I'm going to start off with talking about why training needs to be successful and how gamification hits that mark and accomplishes that. Then I'm going to go into the science and show sort of how it works and how it plays on our brains and what the studies show, as well as some cool technology like AI. Then I'm going to go into really the building blocks of gamification, which are the elements, the critical components. Then I'm going to talk about how you can actually apply it to your company and how it can be used and how you can actually maximize its benefits. And then I'm going to conclude with some references and how you can actually start thinking about implementing gamification into your training, into your business. So some mind-blowing statistics here. Did you know on average that a company actually spends around $1,200 per new employee on training alone? And that in 2014, $70 billion was actually spent on training. That is crazy. And training really has a very significant power effect on the bottom line. And this is because training impacts so many KPIs like performance and retention and attraction. And so it's so tied into all of these things, and it has such a strong effect on them that if training is poor, then performance is going to lack, and you're going to have all these negative impacts on all these KPIs, which is going to negatively impact the bottom line. It can also reduce life-threatening errors because properly trained employees are less likely to make mistakes. These mistakes can potentially be life-threatening. I mean, we definitely don't want to, see any people dying in our work, right? So that's incredibly important as well. So the common culprits of unsuccessful training are usually low levels of engagement and motivation. So to increase or maximize our training outcomes, we need to increase these. We need to have higher levels of motivation and engagement. But how do we do that? I mean, training is so boring, right? Well, that's where gamification comes in. So to start, let's define it. It is the use of game elements and game-making technologies in a non-game context. I highlighted the words game elements and game-making technologies because they really are the most crucial parts of gamification. It's really what makes it gamification. And I'll talk about that more in the upcoming slides. There are a myriad of benefits to gamification. So these are just a few. Again, we're hitting all those really crucial KPIs like engagement, morale, retention, attraction. And of course, that improves our performance through more effective learning. And it also enhances the company image because it's displaying that It's sending a message. It's saying that we value our employees, we value growth, we value technology, we want our employees to be happy. We're going to use the most up-to-date progressive means to accomplish that. So you're really boosting and enhancing the company image. And performance management also sees benefits because the game analytics can actually be used in performance management. And these analytics are typically very accurate, they're very detailed. And so just integrating that in there it really boosts this performance management. All right, so just a very brief history about gamification. It goes all the way back to 1980 with the development of what a game called MUD. And MUD is an acronym. It stands for a multi-user dungeon. This multi-user dungeon game was really centered around a collaborative platform. So this game specifically was more for interacting with other players. And it was so iconic that it actually inspired Second Life and World of Warcraft, some modern games. And then we fast forward all the way into the early 2000s, where we have sort of this concentration of advancements from 2002 to 5 with serious games in 2002. And then we go into Conundrum in 3. And then in 2005, that's our most recent gamification advancement. It really was the first time it was used in a business environment. And it's when the mechanics actually were introduced and integrated to really increase the effectiveness of it and for scoring. All right, so apps are probably the most prevalent, widespread use of gamification. And it's not something we really think about, but they really are at the core. This is gamification. These apps represent gamification. So my favorite out of these is going to be the fitness one because I use it the most. It is actually quite effective. I found the progress bars and the awards and the feedback to be very motivating for me, and I've seen a lot of success with it. There's also Duolingo, which is for learning languages, and Trivia Quest as well. So hopefully you're familiar at least with one of these. They are quite iconic. But what do they have in common? What makes them so addicting, right? We love these games and we can spend hours on them and completely neglect all of our other obligations. So why though? What makes them so alluring? Well, games in general, this is why humans love them. This is what draws us to games. It really is what's called constraint satisfaction. Constraint satisfaction is a form of controlled freedom. So a game is a structured environment. It's where we feel safe. We know that there are constraints and there's goals that we can hit given enough effort, right? We take these steps and we can reach this goal or this constraint. It's challenging, but it is possible. And the more challenging, the higher level of satisfaction and self-efficacy can be derived, and motivation, which equals the greatest amount of competency development. An example of reaching a constraint would be winning a level. So we win a level, we hit that constraint, it makes us feel happy, so it makes us feel satisfied, like we did something good. And of course, it's a break from the ambiguity of reality. And we do have goals in real life, but reaching them is not so cut and dry. There's not steps that can be taken. There's no tutorial that shows us, hey, this is how we get this job, or this is how we, make friends. So this is the controlled environment that feels safe, and we know how to satisfy these needs in it. I love the sword and stone example because it is really the greatest challenge of all time, in my opinion. Only one person can pull that sword out, right? So we know it's possible. However, it is extremely challenging. So only one person pulls it out, and that person derives the greatest satisfaction. So going into the physiology, this is really what's going on in our brains when we play games. We release these hormones called dopamine and endorphins, and they are connected to our pleasure and our learning and our memory and our motor function, and even pain relief. right? You wouldn't think of playing a game as something that releases a pain relieving hormone, but in fact it does, and studies have actually shown this. So what, are you gonna be playing a game and maybe you sprained your ankle and maybe the pain is a little bit alleviated? I'm not sure, but it'd kind of be cool to find out, although I'm probably not going to test that theory myself. But these are produced because games are rewarding and they produce rewarding activities. So those are the hormones. So let's look at the actual psychology. So the needs theories. We have these needs that all humans have, these needs, which are psychological and self-fulfillment. We need autonomy, we need competence, we need social readiness, accomplishment, and we need self-fulfillment. And these are all something that gamification actually includes in it. And it hits all these marks through things like decision-making power and early wins and sort of mastering the basics, which boosts our self-efficacy. And we have social relatedness through these different interactions with other players in the game, whether it be through competition or teamwork. We have accomplishment through our rewards and our feedback. And we hit that self-actualization need through achieving the goals in the game, maybe even just beating the whole game, reaching our full potential, which therein actually triggers the intrinsic motivation and engagement. And this really comes down to high quality learning. This all equals high quality learning. So satisfying the needs really heightens our learning and increases what we get out of it. So a lot of controversy is actually surrounds this 7-20-10 rule, but it's within the numbers themselves, not the actual principle. So I like the actual principle itself as opposed to the numbers. I can see how the numbers could be a little bit controversial. They are a little too neat, a little too pretty, right? Like, how can it be so, exact like that? However, I like the principle because basically it states that the most learning is done through experiences and challenges and on the job. And interactions with others is second to that. And formal training is it's just not as effective. We only get a very small fraction out of formal training. And the OSF is really kind of the same thing, but it more emphasizes social interactions. However, gamification incorporates all of these things. So that's what's cool about it. We don't have to trade off. We can have all of them at once in one thing. Gamification learning theory. This actually shows how gamification affects learning outcomes. So it's defined as the gamification learning theory implies that gamification does not affect learning directly, but it stimulates a learning related behavior in a mediating or moderating process. And basically what that means is that different game elements are going to affect different players in different ways through their attitudes and behaviors that result from the game elements. And this can either result in positive learning outcomes or not so positive learning outcomes. I wouldn't say negative, but an example would be like somebody that's not as competitive, placing them in a competitive gaming environment with a lot of competitive elements may not be quite as effective as placing somebody that has a competitive learning style in that same environment. So the non-competitive person is probably not going to have the best behavior result from that competitive game element, and that's not going to give off the best learning outcome. So the conclusion is that gamification actually does increase engagement and participation, but the learning tendencies actually moderate that engagement. So adaptive gamification really kind of goes back to that previous slide. We need to make sure that our games are adapted and tailored to our specific players' learning tendencies and personalities. And in fact, it has an 84% positive impact on the effectiveness of gamification, or on the effectiveness of learning. So gamification has to be personalized, it has to be meaningful, and it has to be user-centered. That's really what makes it so successful. So going back again to that previous slide, previous example, setting a non-competitive person in a competitive environment, the game has to be adapted into a more collaborative environment, and that's what's going to make it more successful. So AI is a very high-tech solution to adapting gamification to different players' needs. So it uses different techniques like turn prediction, dynamic difficulty adjustment, dynamic reward computation, procedural content generation. I know these are big words, but really it's just tailoring sort of at the finest level, the most granular level to the player's needs and making sure that they stay engaged and they're not bored and there's kind of that right level of challenge and that they're getting rewarded for that level of commitment that they put in. And this really increases their motivation, and it's probably one of the best ways to maximize the effectiveness of gamification. And it can be descriptive, it can be predictive, and it can be prescriptive. So it can hit all these things by explaining what happens next and why and what suggested actions can be taken. So if feasible, if AI, which is still fairly new, can be implemented, definitely I highly recommend researching that a little bit more. So this is where we go into really the building blocks of gamification and what makes gamification, right? So we're starting with awards and feedback, and I'm giving this one its own slide because it is so critical. This is something that, if nothing else, this needs to be included in gamification because this has the strongest effects on our needs and our motivation. And some examples of awards and feedback could be things like points and progress bars and badges and levels and leaderboards and corrective actions and explanations. So feedback could be like something, you're taking it's showing that you need to take this corrective action because you did this wrong. Leaderboards are also kind of a form of award and feedback. It shows where you're at, where everyone else is at in order to make progress. Same thing with progress bars, showing, you're awarded for coming this far, but you still have this ways to go. And they can be used sort of in different ways, either fixed intervals like winning a level or just kind of randomly given throughout levels, just to kind of further increase the satisfaction and engagement. So critical element of gamification, awards and feedback. You've got other elements as well. These are also critical. Meaningful stories. So games need to have a meaningful story because it really allows for more engagement and retention. Humans love stories. It allows us to really pick up on the knowledge. The different genres are going to be things like quests and tragedies and suspense. And then you have personalization as well. So this can be done through avatar customization and interactive conversations. And this really enhances the engagement and the motivation and allows the user to feel like this game is really meant for them. Then you have micro interactions, which seem kind of insignificant, but they're actually very important because they really keep the user engaged and satisfied. And they're just little things, like Easter eggs, sound effects, and toggle. I love Easter eggs. There's a great example with Luigi down at the bottom here, or not Luigi. Sorry, I'm not really super familiar, but it's Mario, and he's sort of in another game here, and I don't really know what that game is specifically, but it's cute because you're like, oh, I'm going to keep looking for these Easter eggs, and it's kind of fun in that way. Then you have time, which needs that sense of urgency, and it really gets them honed in on the moment and focused in. And that also increases motivation and engagement. And that an example of that could be like a countdown clock at the top of the screen. Then you have that. So now we're going to go into how to actually apply it. And so the first thing that needs to be noted here is the game learning hierarchy. And why this is important is because you really want to focus on gamification because there are other forms of game learning out there. So you've got game-based learning, which is kind of the most broad. Then you go into serious games, which kind of narrows it down a little bit more and kind of adds a little bit more into the game learning as far as what industries and what techniques are used. And then you go into gamification, which is going to be the most effective because it has the elements. And that's really the difference, is the design around these elements and sort of factoring in the different players' learning styles. And that's really what these mechanics are, really what causes behavioral change. And this is done through the tasks and the goals. And gamification is also ongoing. It's not a one and done thing. It's something that keeps building on itself and you keep implementing in subsequent sessions. So that is what you need to look for, is gamification. That's going to be the most effective. And then, of course, we cannot skip this. This is non-negotiable. We have to have Addi. Addi is what training is all about, right? We have to go through this process in order to maximize our training success. So we're adding in gamification within the Addi model. So we're just adding in a few more steps. We still analyze, we still go through the process. We start with analysis. We need to know who our players are, what their needs are. It kind of goes back to the adaptive gamification. We need to figure out who our players are and really what motivates them. And, we can do that through different means, like personality assessments. And we can maybe even try that, if possible, we can try out that AI. And if it's not feasible to really tailor to each individual need, what needs to be done is actually just including all the elements within the game for, maybe large groups, if it's not feasible to tailor to individual needs. And then you have to look at your superior and behavior goals. Superior would be things like a KPI, like improve customer service. And the behavioral level goal would be something like better communication or more active listening. That would be a behavioral level goal. So you need to define these. Then you got to go and design. And this is where you can see the most differences as far as adding gamification into this process, because you have to think about really what the work processes are, and at the most granular level, look at what tasks are involved. And that's why it's so critical to include the employee's input in this. For the task selection, and at that point, you can figure out what game elements and mechanics can be used. So then you go into develop, you need to do the test run, figure out what materials you need. Are you going to use the company phones or iPads? Are you going to use PCs? How is this going to be done? Then you need to implement it. Then you need to evaluate it. Was it the game or the Addi process? Which one was, the problem or the issue? What caused the ineffectiveness if it was ineffective? So identify the areas of improvement and what the player results are. So just some tips for implementing, I gotta go back. So some tips for implementing gamification. Never, ever, ever skip Addi. You always want to make that front and center. You also want to include, you also want to maintain a relationship with the game developers and the training pros. What if there is a bug that needs to be fixed or an update? Communicating maybe some new developments. So it is critical to have that really strong relationships with the training pros and game developers. It also needs to be engaging. We don't want to bore the employees, we want to make sure it's engaging and fun. And if it is continuous, it needs to have the ability to be updated. And embedding games and other training is important because it really allows the employees to get assimilated towards this new way of learning through gamification. So including it more in other contexts or other training is going to enhance the effectiveness of it. And variety. It's good to switch it up, right? Maybe use different games, different, genres. And, it's always good to keep that variety going, to keep the employees engaged and having fun. So just some companies that you can look into to really think about where you maybe want to start with this. I love personally the training arcade. I love the variety. I love all the features that they have. Scabify also has some of the more basics as well. But I like the training arcade because you can even integrate it into a learning management system for optimal performance management using the analytics. You also have a lot of different mechanics and questions. And here's just a very brief clip. I'm not going to play too much of it, but this is the Wheel of Fortune. This is one of their more popular games. All right, fun stuff, right? All right, so that's just some, companies to think about if you want to research this a little bit more. Okay, so other business contexts, we can use it in onboarding, team building activities, employee engagement, recruiting, marketing. So it can be used in so many different things to really enhance the success. And this example that I show right here is, it's like, I think it's adorable. It's actually a shrimp. It's called Shrimp Attack. It's a game that KFC used as a marketing campaign in Japan. I'm not sure if it's available here, but it looks like fun. And it looks like a great way to really build the company image. Just to review, gamification turbocharges training, and this improves the KPIs. And we need to make sure that we're adapting the games to address different learning styles and personalities. That's what's going to make it most effective. And then basing the elements and the mechanics off of these needs. We also need to make the distinction between gamification and the more broader types of game-based learning, like serious games and game-based learning. And then we also need to make sure that the Addi process is being implemented in order to maximize success for gamification. So we need to include it within the Addi model. All right, so these are the steps that can actually be taken to start thinking about how you can implement gamification in your company. So you need to identify the training needs first. So again, back to the Addi, the analysis part, what the constraints are as far as time and financial constraints go. Then you want to research the companies. There are a lot of companies out there. They all have different features. So you have to kind of go back and see what's going to best align with your needs and constraints and what critical features each company offers. With that being said, unfortunately, it is game over. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I am actually going to include some links for some more resources in the description. With that also being said, I'm going to go ahead and go over to my references here. This is where I got all of my information. Hope this was enjoyable and you learned a lot. Thanks.